everyone, my name is Helen and welcome back to Women in Film Reviews. We are kicking off season 3 today and I am so excited to get the ball rolling on this one. Before we get started, I just want to remind you all that I put out a video last week reflecting on my process in making season 2 of Women in Film Reviews, as well as some of my goals for improvement in season 3. One of those goals was to view more films made by women of color and more films made by queer women. So today I am sticking to my word and we are going to be talking about the 2020 Netflix film The Half of It, written and directed by Alice Wu. This is Alice Wu's second feature film after 2004's Saving Face. And this film continues some of the conversations started in Saving Face regarding themes about being a second-generation Chinese immigrant coming to terms with their own sexuality. The Half of It tells the story of Ellie Chu, a closeted teenager in the small town of Squamish. Ellie's father is the station master of this small town, but the job doesn't pay very much, so in order to earn a little bit of extra money, Ellie revises the essays of her fellow classmate. When Paul Munsky, an awkward tight end of the football team, asks Ellie to write a love letter in his name to his crush, Aster Flores, Ellie is initially conflicted because she also has a crush on Aster. Ellie agrees to this scheme due to the need for additional funds, but in the process of their work, Ellie and Paul develop an unlikely friendship and they come to learn that they have a lot more in common than they initially thought. Because The Half of It is partly inspired by the tale of Cyrano de Bergerac, it has also drawn comparisons to another Netflix-produced high school set adaptation of this story, Sierra Burgess is the Loser, which was released in 2018. That film was regarded as highly problematic, due in part to the bold nature of the catfishing involved, as well as a kiss that definitely falls into the bucket of sexual assault. And while there is some slightly stalkerish behavior from Ellie and Paul trying to figure out the things that Aster likes, it never falls into the category of sexual assault here. What a low bar to clear. The Half of It also stays away from big dramatic moments where these characters do horrifically mean things to each other out of revenge, as well as the big friendship-ending misunderstanding that comes about as the result of the revelation of the scheme. Thank God. And though the catalyst of the movie does have to do with high school romance or the potential for one, the movie manages to have a happy ending that doesn't force people together who aren't ready to be in a relationship yet. Not gonna lie, this is something that this movie does better than another queer drama that I love, Simon. Of course, in order to get to that happy ending, we need to be invested in these characters, and boy oh boy are these performances great. First, we have Leah Lewis as Ellie Chu. Lewis is excellent in this role, portraying a teenager who is just coming to her own in so many facets of her life, from her queerness to her shyness to her status as a second-generation Chinese immigrant. Throughout the movie, you see her become more and more comfortable with opening up to her new friends, and there is just this spark that she gains throughout. Then we have Daniel Diemer, who is near perfect as the lovesick football dweeb Paul. He is just the right amount of emotionally immature and also very self-aware and smart. And if Tumblr has taught us anything else, the best friendship combo is that of the himbo and the lesbian. Facts. Diemer actually surprised me a lot in the last part of this movie because a lot of the emotional weight of the story ends up falling on his shoulders and he handles it so well. Then of course we have our third lead and love interest, Aster, played wonderfully by Alexis Lemire. Throughout the movie, you can tell that there is just so much that she wants to express and show the world, while everyone around her is trying to put her in some sort of box, be it that of the lower class Latina or that of the potential future wife of the rich white kid in town. When she is given the chance to truly be herself, there is just this joy that radiates off of her. And you get the feeling that while she and Ellie may not end up together romantically, they would still actually end up being pretty good friends. Two other performances here that I have to highlight include Colin Cho as Ellie's father, Edwin, and Becky Ann Baker as Mrs. Gesellschaft, Ellie's language arts teacher who encourages her to attend college outside of Squamish. Both of these characters are instrumental in forming Ellie's arc, and especially the scenes with her and her father are just so wonderful and touching to watch. Mrs. Gesellschaft reminds me so much of my AP literature teacher in high school, just in the best way possible. Although I'm pretty sure my teacher wouldn't have been so lenient about Ellie writing everyone else's essays. Can't say I blame her though. I too would not want to read a bunch of terrible essays and grade them each week. As the half of it centers on a young Chinese American teenager, the movie also highlights a lot of the culturally racist microaggressions that a teenager like Ellie would be facing on a daily basis. One of the most consistent instances of this occurs as the rich white students drive past her on her daily commute to and from school by bike, and they call her some really racially stereotypical, horrible names. In fact, the moment Paul actually comes to her defense here against them is one of the most formative moments of their friendship. The catalyst of the story also comes into play due to the racist operators of the power company that supplies the electricity to Ellie's home. Ellie is forced to pay the bills over the phone because the operators just refuse to understand her dad's accent, while hers is much more American sounding and quote-unquote acceptable, which she ends up taking Paul up on his offer because she needs the money to pay those bills. Ellie and her father were never supposed to remain in Squamish once they arrived in America. Mr. Chu is incredibly smart and has a PhD, but no American companies will hire him because of his middling English, and it's really heartbreaking to see these two people who have so much potential be put back because of their race. They are stuck in a town where the nearest Asian grocer is 2 hours away by bicycle. And of course, there is the attempt by the rich white guys to sabotage Ellie's talent show performance by cutting the strings on the piano before she's about to play. Wu's approach to portraying racism on film is so smart here, and it's probably the most accurate of a lot of mainstream portrayals of race that I've seen in film. Hollywood movies about race tend to be focused on one particular incident that, of course, is wrong, and of course someone is going to get in trouble for this, and it's always focuses on such big things. But the reality is that the majority of racist instances in the world are a lot more similar to the things that Ellie experiences in this movie. They are smaller incidents that someone who isn't involved close up wouldn't bat an eye at. So of course the kids that bully her in this movie aren't going to get in trouble. If the last couple weeks on the political front have proved anything, it's that racism is baked and broiled into the fabric of American culture. And yes, it manifests itself in big incidents, but most commonly it manifests itself in all these microaggressions that Ellie and other teenagers of color and people of color face. I'm not sorry to bring this up because 70 million people voted for President Cheeto Dust in this past election, and even though hopefully by the time this video comes out he will be out of office, it just shows that it is so baked and ingrained into our culture, and you can't just ignore that. And speaking of evangelicals who elected Trump, was I? Oh well, most of the people in this town would fall into that camp anyways. This movie probably has the most honest portrayal of teenagers trying to come to terms with the religion that they were raised in. This entire town is super Christian, or at least outwardly so. Ellie, a classically trained pianist, is the accompanist in the local church, despite being probably one of the only people who doesn't outwardly believe in Jesus. I did chuckle at the joke about Astor's dad not being able to accept mediocre accompanists and referring to Ellie as his favorite heathen. As the child of a church accompanist, I can confirm that Astor's dad is in the majority with regards to mediocre ones. There is also the very pronounced pressure for these high schoolers to marry young. Astor in the movie is dating this rich lunkhead named Trig, and it is assumed by pretty much almost everyone in this town that they will end up married. What? It is so heartbreaking that this girl is on track to being forced into a marriage that she clearly will not be happy in. And believe it or not, this is actually something that teenagers and young adults in the Christian community are still very much pressured into. When I started dating my first boyfriend in high school, it's something that my grandparents brought up not 3 months into dating. And when I got to Calvin College, phrases like freshman frenzy and ring by spring really just put this pressure on the female students to marry young and have kids immediately. I really thought we had left the teenagers marrying for money trope back in the 1800s, but oh well. I'm gonna be honest, that kind of pressure sucks, and I was so happy and relieved when Aster finally got out of that relationship. The biggest change of faith, however, in this film, in my opinion, comes from Paul. His idea of what it means to be gay is changed directly because of his friendship with Ellie. A mainstream movie would milk the moment that he finds out about her sexuality and have him out her to the entire school out of revenge. Really, it would just make her lowest moment even lower, and that, I hate that trend so much. I hated it in Love, Simon, I hate it now. But instead of that, Paul actually goes out of his way to try and unlearn what he was taught about gay people from a very young age and try to understand Ellie better. Which, good job, movie, you did a good thing. There is a very widely held assumption that teenagers, for the most part, have moved beyond being gay being considered a bad thing. But this is really not necessarily the case in smaller rural areas, especially ones that are very heavily Christian. I didn't necessarily grow up in a small town. Traverse City is pretty sizable, but I still grew up deep in the CRC. I am so ashamed to admit this, but up until high school, I genuinely did believe that being gay was a bad thing. And I'm fairly certain that some of the people that I went to church with in high school and who I eventually went to college with still hold that belief, and that's unfortunate. Luckily, once I did begin to question my faith, my parents, especially my mom, were really supportive in me unlearning what I had learned in my youth about gay people. And of course, a few years later, that eventually led me down the road of realizing that I am indeed bisexual. If you'd like another example of a similar and, to be honest, far more harrowing journey on that part, I really recommend you watch Chris Stuckman's video about him getting out of the Jehovah's Witnesses and eventually coming out as pansexual. It's a really informative read and watch, and is just go watch it, please. In any case, in a town like this, it would make sense that Paul wouldn't have had to challenge his beliefs about what he was taught when he was young. Because in such a small town where someone would be super deathly afraid of coming out, he would never have had the chance to experience it. There is this beautiful scene in the woods in the middle of the movie where Aster and Ellie have this conversation about believing in God or not believing in God, and whether it's okay to be having those doubts. Aster also asks Paul a little bit later on about his beliefs. Questioning the beliefs that you grew up with, especially if you were in the Christian community, is absolutely okay, and I would argue necessary, because it means that you are beginning to form your own opinion about the things that your parents believe and the things that your church community taught you when you were young, and finding that some of those beliefs are probably very wrong. That scene with Ellie and Aster just encapsulates so well the journey that a lot of teenagers and young adults are on, and it almost made me cry because I wish I could have seen this type of conversation happening in a movie when I was a teenager, because I was very lost around that time. And that kind of moment of intimacy between friends really drives home Woo's approach to showing the importance of different types of love. Importance is placed on romantic love, yes, but in the end, no one actually comes out of this story in a committed romantic relationship. Yeah, it manifests in many ways, including, of course, Paul trying to get with Aster, while Ellie also has a crush on Aster, Paul eventually falling for Ellie, Aster questions if she really does like Ellie, and she does reject Trigg's marriage proposal, which, why, my dude, why? And of course, Trigg moronically thinking that Ellie is into him because self-centeredness knows no bounds. In fact, the most important relationship in this film is actually platonic. Paul and Ellie end up forming a deep and lasting friendship that I was rooting for way more than either of them ending up with Aster. I was worried that Paul wasn't going to be friends with her anymore after she came out. But I was so relieved that the journey of emotional growth that Ellie helps him on continued past that point on his own, and he learns to accept her sexuality and he continues to be friends with her. I loved the recreation of the romantic train scene in Outgrowing that Ellie and Paul watch earlier in the movie at the end of the movie when it's time for Ellie and Paul to part ways. I can say this from experience, the parting of close friends is just as heartbreaking as the parting of lovers. And of course, there is the importance of familial relationships as they pertain to both Ellie and Paul's families. Ellie and her dad have just this wonderful, loving relationship throughout the movie, and that relationship is one of the reasons why Ellie is initially hesitant to pursue her dreams outside Squamish. Ellie also deeply misses her deceased mother, and it's her desire to be like her with her dad's encouragement that ultimately helps drive her decision to leave and go to Grinnell College. Paul, meanwhile, feels so left out of his family due to the abundance of siblings, as well as his parents' reluctance to change things around there while he himself is going through a journey of growth. The chaos when he brings Ellie to his house encapsulates this perfectly. Paul sort of becomes adopted into Ellie's and her dad's family, and he begins to receive the familial love and support that he isn't necessarily getting at home. To the point that when Ellie and Aster disappear for the day, Paul and Mr. Chu actually have a wonderful day cooking on their own and learning more about each other. Almost like father and son. And when Ellie finally leaves at the end of the movie, Paul promises to take care of Ellie's dad while she's gone. This brings me to the final major theme that I would like to discuss here, that of outgrowing your small hometown. Everything that I've talked about already ultimately leads up to all three of our lead characters realizing that they have dreams and ambitions that are just not going to be possible by remaining in Squamish. Ellie feels extremely out of place as the only Chinese girl in this town full of white Christians. But despite this, she actually has the least desire to leave at the beginning of the movie until she realizes that there really truly isn't going to be anything for her there. The journey of growth that she goes on is one where she learns to stand up for herself, and she realizes that she is deserving of the chance to go out and follow her dreams. Alice Wu uses quotes to underline this journey, and she intersperses several title cards with quotes throughout. Ellie spends the movie quoting other people, but it's not until the climactic church scene at the end where she starts to quote herself and finally lets her voice be heard. And it's at that moment that we know that she is finally ready to make her own way in the world. Paul, meanwhile, has ambitions to pursue cooking outside the confines of Squamish and his family's restaurant. His ideas are pretty out there, but Ellie and her father try and actually end up quite liking his food, and Ellie secretly writes letters to critics recommending it. Aster has ambitions to go to art school, something that she and Paul, Ellie, end up bonding over through their written communication. But like I said, she is pressured by her family into marrying at a young age. With Ellie's help, she finds the strength to reject her family's expectations for her and Trig's proposal and pursue what she actually wants to do. The real happy ending here is that Ellie, Paul, and Aster have all gained the confidence to reject the fate that this small community has laid out for them and pursue their own dreams. Ellie at Grinnell, Aster at art school, and Paul with his new recipes. Yes, we do get to see Aster and Ellie kiss, and it was nice to see, you know, we like a good, happy lesbian moment. But Aster, importantly, is also given the space and time to properly come to terms with her own sexuality, and she is not forced into a relationship at the end of the movie. She too needs time to unpack all of the perceptions around queerness that she was taught at a young age. And Ellie is so wonderful to accept that and allow her to go on her own journey of growth. The Cyrano de Bergerac plot device is instrumental to the catalyst of the story at the beginning, But Alice Wu uses the framework of this story to discuss all of the themes that I mentioned in this video. And even though I was rooting for Aster and Ellie to end up together at the end of the story, it didn't so much disappoint me when they decided to go their separate ways. Lastly, there's just a few small things that I'd like to mention. There is a brief moment highlighting the town's inherent classism when a bunch of girls are making fun of Aster's family for not owning their own house. This is something that I definitely felt in my hometown, and it's also something that I wished that the film would have delved into a little bit more. I loved the use of ping pong as a metaphor for conversation. As someone with anxiety, it definitely registered with my struggle to be able to keep conversations naturally going, especially over text. And it was a good indicator of Ellie's growth and opening up to Paul. There is the excellent use of the Greek mythos regarding the concept of the other half, and this is continued through the use of mirrors throughout the movie. And finally, Alice Wu, I see what you did there with that little recreation of the iconic Mean Girls hallway strut scene, but from the uncomfortable perspective of Aster. Just, you know my heart. And on that note, what are my final thoughts on this movie? The half of it is so much more than just a high school set rom-com. It is one of the most honest meditations on coming of age and learning to forge your own path outside of the space that you grew up in that I have ever seen. It is so charming and sweet and funny, and yes, there are a fair few cringy moments. But they're not cringy because they're poorly written. They are cringy because they remind me of how awkward my own high school self was. In short, it's cringy because it's true. I can't believe more people are not talking about this movie. Its release definitely suffered from the effects of COVID-19. It was supposed to premiere at Tribeca in April 2020 before that got canceled. And it did eventually get its Netflix release in May. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly, highly recommend it. Alice Wu has outdone herself here, and I cannot wait to see what she does next. If you'd like to see more reviews of the half of it from an Asian perspective, I highly recommend videos put out by With Cindy and by Christina Jing. I will be putting links to those videos in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching this week's Women in Film review. Be sure to subscribe below and make sure to tap the bell to get notified when these videos go live. Thank you to Tim for being a patron and supporting this channel. If you'd like to see these videos a day early, you can head over to patreon.com/HelenGrotehuis and sign up to support my channel for just £5 a month. You will also get access to behind the scenes content, polls to help me choose the next movie I review for this series, and of course the patron exclusive monthly movie commentaries done by myself and my husband. Also, make sure to subscribe to my second channel. Like I said last week, there may be some new content coming over there in the next few months. If you'd like a summary of my past projects or you would like to work with me, you can head over to my website, helen-grotehuis.com, for more information. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at HelenMarie95, on Instagram at HelenMarie_95, and on Facebook at facebook.com/HelenGrotehuisWriter. All of those links will be in the description down below, along with last week's video. Thank you guys again so much for supporting me. I cannot wait to continue this series and to talk about some more really good movies. As always, remember to keep living awesome lives, please stay safe, and I will see you all in 2 weeks for another Women in Film review. Bye!